All right, thank you, Ms. A. Mary Baraka, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited. I'll kind of give you what we were thinking, and the students submitted questions for homework. We've been covering some current events issues as well as some historical issues, so students have learned about school funding and schools in the United States. They've learned about housing discrimination, and housing issues in the United States and in Newark, and they've also learned about police and police conduct, and kind of, we were just actually, before you got here, watching that front line from a couple of years ago about policing the police, and kind of learning about some of the things that have gone on since then. But before we get into that, I wanted to first congratulate you on winning a second term. And I wanted to ask this question of, what did you learn during this campaign about the people of Newark that you didn't know before?
That I didn't know about the people of Newark?
Yeah.
I don't think the campaign taught me anything about the people of Newark. Basically, I think what I do know about the folks in Newark, are they're concerned about their families, the issues that are going on in the city, more than they're concerned about the kind of, the back and forth that usually happens in campaigns, and the kind of journalistic, things that people put on in their blogs, on the press and the Ledger and all those other things. Mm-hmm. People basically make up their mind on their own from their relationship either with you or the things that they see that's happening in the city. So I basically knew that already, but it confirmed it, I should say, for me in the second time around.
That's great.
So kind of as Ms. A mentioned, as Albertanto mentioned earlier, a lot of our students are looking at colleges and are thinking about colleges. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, and ask you if you could tell us a little bit more about your college experience and how you went about choosing Howard.
I don't think you want the kids to listen to me about how I chose college. I filled out one college application, and I don't want you to do that. You probably should fill out as many college applications as you can. But I don't never have for the most part, I don't have a plan B. I don't subscribe to that for the most part. I think people have plan B most of the time because they don't have faith in their plan A. And I spend a lot of time trying to make sure what I want happens. And of course, you need to figure out, just in case that don't happen, and that's probably something for you. I went on a class trip to Howard University. I didn't even want to go. I was on my way to school. I lived around the corner from University High School. It's probably not a good thing. It's probably why I was late a lot. I lived around the corner from the school. You guys, high school students. I was a high school student like you, pretty average kid. I read a lot. I didn't want to go on a trip. I walked past the bus. My guidance counselor told me that there was a trip to historically black colleges. I told her, great, I'm not going. And, she was smarter than me, thank God. She asked me, why are you not going? She went through this whole thing. I listened to her spiel, and I thought I was smart. I told her I didn't have a permission slip, so I can't go. So she went to the office and got me a permission slip and called my father on the phone and got his permission over the phone. So she was a little smarter than me that day. And so I wound up going on a trip to Howard University. And when I went there, I fell in love with the school as soon as I saw it. So I decided at that point that I was going to go to Howard, and there was no other place that I was going to go. And I filled out a college application for that. I did everything that was necessary for me to get to Howard, and by the grace of God, it happened for me. So that's how I went to school. It was the best experience of my life. Howard changed my life tremendously. I met lifelong friends in college that I'm still in touch with today, from all over the country, all over the world, possibly. So college is an incredible, incredible experience for me. And HBCU, Howard University, the Mecca. Make sure if you fill out a college application, it's the place to be. They should pay me for that commercial.
I want all of our students to keep that in mind when they don't want to go on the trips that we're taking them to, that a little bit of providence was able to lead the mayor to the right place. Some of the students had asked this question, they submitted this question, kind of what motivated you to run for mayor in the first place? And what made you want to get involved and kind of give back to your city?
Well, I ran for mayor when I was 24 first as a public school teacher. I was a teacher at Warren Street School. I ran for mayor. I hung around a group of kids who young people were part of an organization in the community. We did a lot of community activity. It was almost like a dare. I ran. We had very little money. We ran to win. Obviously, we didn't. I thank God that we didn't win when I was 24. I probably would not know any of the things that I know today. So, you know, since then, I've been running for office. I've never stopped. I've got the bug, addicted to trying to, you know, help and be involved politically in the city. I probably ran for 16 years straight. You know, I ran a bunch of times before I actually won anything. Before I became the councilman of the South Ward, I ran a bunch of times and lost several times. And then I won, and then, you know, I ran for mayor and won it and won then. And the mayor, you know, piece was, there were a lot of, you know, our mayor at the time was Cory Booker. He was running for the United States Senate. It cut his time short as the mayor. I was going to support the congressman now, Donald Payne, for mayor if he ran. I told him such, that I would support him for mayor if he ran. You know, I was really content with being a South Ward councilman, that I would support somebody that's running for mayor. His father died in that process. So all of these things happened so fast. When his father passed away, he ran for his father's seat and became the congressman of the United States of District 10, which left me personally with nobody that I wanted to support for mayor. So I ran myself. It was a huge risk. I did it, and by the grace of God, I won.
And so what do you love most about being mayor after winning that?
Well, the great thing about being mayor of this city is because I was born and raised here. And I got to see Newark evolve and change. And I know some of the issues and problems that exist in the city because I've lived and grew up in this community. My parents, my family, my brothers and sisters, my friends, we all live here. So, you know, I get to change buildings and that I've seen abandoned all my life, to be able to put life in them, to see them turn into something, fix vacant lots that I know have been vacant for a huge period of time. I get to make real changes that I know are affecting people's lives every day, that I actually know, right? So it's not I'm not so far removed from the process because I actually live in the city and I know the people in the city. So when things happen, I know how it affects their lives. From changing summer jobs from 1,000 to 3,000 jobs. I was a summer youth kid. My first job was Speedy, and I cleaned up vacant lots. And then I moved on to be a program rep. So when I moved to change us from having 1,000 to 3,000 jobs, I know what it means for those kids and for us to change what the jobs that they actually do. So they don't have to just clean lots. They do a whole variety of things, from working at United Airlines to interning at NJIT to doing coding to working at City Hall. It's kind of advanced, and I know how I felt cleaning up lots in the summertime. I appreciated the money, but it could have been a lot more beneficial for me. And so I make sure that it's more beneficial for young people in the city. So those kinds of things make me feel good that I'm doing real things to help people's real life and not just these kind of theoretical things that we talk about.
And so when you were in college, did you know that you planned on going back to your community to give back, or did you just
Absolutely.
want to get back?
No, I deliberately came back to Newark. When I was in college, I was really like a hardcore kind of activist, at the time, and I knew I was going to come to Newark. I read a book at the time. I heard a guy speak called Jawanza Kunjufu, that's his name. He wrote a book called Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. And he has a part 1 and part 2. I read that, I listened to him speak, and he talked about how in elementary school, African-American boys fall behind and, are overly classified and special needs and all these kinds of things. And it kind of appealed to me, and I knew exactly what he was talking about because I grew up in that environment. So I made a pledge to go back to where I lived and become an educator, make sure that I didn't do that. And I was an educator in Newark Public Schools for 22 years before I became the mayor.
I think interestingly, you were a black educator in Newark public school, and I think nowadays there's there's not as many African American teachers in public schools. How do you think your impact as a black teacher impacted your students who are predominantly black?
I think I hope to think I had a great impact on young people there. Particularly, there's not a lot of African American men you know, two male teachers in the school. I mean, we usually there represented as security guards and custodians. But, you know, for the most part, me being a principal and a teacher, I had a kind of empathy for what kids were going through. And I try my best to, you know, deal with the kind of trauma that comes with growing up in these communities, addressing it, understanding that it exists, mitigating some of those problems. And I think it was good for people to see me in that role, in that position, as a teacher, but as a caring teacher, not just as some guy that was there, but also as a principal, making decisions about what takes place in kids' lives every single day. And then me being outside after school, me being a part of their real life, not just their academic life, was very important. So I think I had a huge impact. From elementary school all the way to high school, I was everything. I was a substitute teacher, a teacher, a vice principal, then a principal. So I moved all the way through the entire thing. Yeah.
Can you talk about how that principal role in particular, I think is a really, really important role. And our students, they're here, they're at school, and they're here, and kind of Miss Abatanto is sort of our principal here. And what are the skills or the things that you learned while as a principal that you really brought, you know, back to public service and back to the broader community? I think that's
collaboration is probably the number one thing that I bring. You know, what's interesting is that like people around the country are amazed at the kind of collaboration that happens in Newark between you know, and even people that were here all this time, between the academic community, like the higher ed community, the private sector, philanthropic community, how we all work together, how I reach out across lines and bring people to a space so we can make things happen. And I think that's a skill that I learned as a principal, because obviously as a principal you can't get anything done in the school without collaboration. I mean, that's key, and that's one of the 21st century skills that we try to teach over and over and over again. And so that is something I absolutely brought with me from being in crisis management. You know, principals, we have to deal with crisis like at 6 o'clock in the morning. Like we're at the school 2 hours before the kids get there. Kids don't know all of the things we have to fix before they even walked in the door. You know, if it's a flood, if it's this, if it's that, we have to deal with so many things, from teachers calling out, fixing schedules, substitutes. It's a million and one things that happen over the weekend with children, and making sure you maintain that when they come to school, that doesn't blow up into an incident. So all those kinds of crises we manage, and I don't think the rest of the world understands what it means to be a principal, particularly a principal in urban America. Like what it means to be a principal in the inner city in America is a very difficult task. And it takes a lot of skills, a lot of patience, a lot of collaboration, a lot of quick thinking on your feet, and that kind of crisis management, and planning. Because we are trying to make outcomes happen in a very small period of time. We have a very small period of time to make very big things happen, to fill huge gaps. Like, kids come to us with enormous gaps that we have to close in a very small period of time. And if we're not able to do that, then we're judged by the fact that the rest of the world has failed these young people, and we're responsible for getting them right in 3 years. Right? So, I mean, it's a huge task, and you know, hats off to any principal in America, particularly the ones that take on jobs here in these cities. You know, because it's a huge thing to do.
It's almost like one of those jobs where if you're doing a really good job, no one's really seeing all the work that you're doing, right? You said you show up at 6, you're leaving after the students, you're managing those crises. They don't even know that there was a flood. They don't even know that a teacher was out.
And they don't know the gaps that you had to deal with, how to move kids forward, or how they came to you, and you know, how much you had to pour in to get them to the space that they're at. Even with the incremental improvements that you see in schools, people may scoff at that and say, well, that's nothing. But the amount of work that it took you to get from where they were to where they are now is tremendous. Is emotional, is like intellectual, you know, it's physical kind of real work that it takes to move kids from one place to another. Almost with, you know, really with just the people that are, you know, around you in your immediate presence.
Earlier you were talking about how you felt like you served as an advisor for your students in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Did you see yourself as somewhat of a father figure to your students, or how did you draw the line between their personal lives at home and how that may impact their classroom education, or what role you play in navigating the education and home life situation that comes.
Well, the first thing you need to do to even turn the school around is change the culture. Like, so school culture is like the most important thing in moving schools for us. I mean, because if you can't change the school culture, you cannot do anything about academic improvement of the school in a holistic way. So you have to deal with kids in their personal lives, in their situations. There's no way around it. Like kids that are hungry, or they don't have this, or they don't have that, or incidents that happened over the weekend, or the thinking that kids, the group think that kids have, and what they feel about the school that they're in, the building that they're a part of. We live in a community that's filled with trauma, and school is a safe place. If the school is not a safe place, culturally, physically, emotionally, intellectually, then the school building becomes like any other institution in the city, divorced from these kids' lives, and so they really don't feel anything for it. They don't, they could care less whether they're there or not. Most of the time they're there because their mama want them to, or they're trying to impress their family members, or they feel like they need to be there in order to improve their personal life. Like if none of those things were there, they wouldn't come. And those kids who feel like that's not important to them don't come. Right? The kids need to come to school and feel like they want to be there. School is mine. Like, so that's the first thing people have to feel. This is my school. So school pride, school culture, all of that is tremendously important in order to get kids to buy into what's actually taking place. And they have to have a say-so in some of the things that are taking place in the building. Like, they have to feel like that I have a kind of vested interest in this school building and what's happening in here. And the same thing with the city. People have to have a vested interest. If they're not interested in it, and the best way to get people interested in something is like if I took a picture of this room and I handed it out, the first thing people are going to look for in the picture is themselves. They're going to want to know what they look like, where they at, what their position is when they look at the picture. And if you look at the picture, you don't see yourself, the picture gets less interesting, right? And if you don't see people it gets even more less interesting, right? So if it's just a picture full of strangers, it might be put down somewhere. So people have to see themselves in the institution, or the institution is not important to them.
And so do you think that starts with like the students first, and not just the teachers? Or
No, it starts absolutely with the leadership of the school. That's what it starts with. It starts with the leadership, with the principal and the administrators, and then the teachers, and then school leaders, student leaders and stuff like that. And if your school doesn't have any student leaders, any formal student leaders, then you need to create some, because there's always leaders in the building. When they're not formal ones, then you don't have any control over what's happening in your building.
So one thing that the students learned about was the return of local control to the Newark school system, to the city of Newark. So can you just kind of talk a little bit about that and kind of help the students understand exactly what that means for them, and kind of what some of your kind of goals and plans are for that?
Well, it's probably like in Newark, like young people probably don't understand really what it means, because we, like in their generation and the past generation, have never had it. Like we're talking over 2 decades, there's never been no local control. And the rest of America has a right to pick their own superintendent, to decide what kind of education happens there, what the curriculum looks like, the contracts, all of the things that you deal with every single day. They're elected members or appointed members that actually come from your community, that you get to be a part of and make a decision about what happens in your schools. That didn't happen in Newark for a very, very, very long time. And people just don't understand how it works. So even now when we say we have local control, people think that I control the school system, which is not what local control means. So I get a lot of social media stuff about, can you do this, can you do that, you need to do this. But I can't do any of it because I'm not in charge, right, of the schools. And people don't know that. Or they say, oh, the schools just came back and our lunch is terrible and this is that, and I get that too. So, and I have to deal with that. You've got to explain to people that local control does not mean that the mayor is in charge. What it means is that you have a say-so as parents about who is in charge. You get to pick a school board, who now gets to pick a superintendent, and now you have a greater say-so on what actually happens in your schools in the city. And I think that that's incredibly important. When it happened, I just became a teacher the state just finished a Supreme Court case called Abbott versus Burt that said that the way schools were funded was not equal, that schools in New Jersey are funded by property tax, and that it was inherently wrong and unequal to fund schools through property taxes because you had cities like Newark where 75% of the people in the city are renters and pay no property taxes, right? So they could not raise the kind of money that was necessary to fund a public school system without state support to supplement that funding. If it continued that way, we would always be underfunded, less resourced, and don't have what we need. The state Supreme Court adjudicated that, ruled in favor of the 30 districts across the city. A state who sued, came up with a funding formula, and the state has never ever funded the schools the way it should be funded, even after the Supreme Court case. So if the schools were funded the way that the Supreme Court says that it should be funded, Newark would be owed an additional $140 million a year that we're not getting. It's a lot of money. We're not talking about $15 here, right? So that's an additional amount of money obviously that we're supposed to have that we're just not getting.
Per year.
Per year.
Yeah.
Annually.
So over the last 20 years, that's a lot of money.
It's over the last 20 years, absolutely. So it's unfortunate, but that's where we are, right? And we constantly struggle to get those resources, and we wind up fighting each other locally because those resources don't exist, right? And and that's what, part of that is local control, is why we fight and why we're trying to get equity and funding on the state side. And we have a governor now that has pledged to fund Abbott completely over a period of years, taking time to get there, but at least pledged to do that, which is a good thing for us because we've never had a governor who said that they would adhere to the Supreme Court, right?
Kind of along the same line. So I think the students, we had watched a NPR or listened to some podcasts about the amount of money being spent per pupil, and Newark was highlighted as spending around $30,000 per pupil, and some of the students were a little shocked by that, and they had some, I imagine some of the social media comments that you might be getting, and a question that came out of that from some students was how might local control shift the way some of those priorities are, and what are some things, I know that you support an elected school board, but what are some of the things that you think might be priorities to make our students' lives in school a little better?
So I don't want you to be taken aback by that number, because a lot of people are, and they use that against you. But I want to tell you that education is expensive, but so is ignorance and jail. It costs $30,000 or more to keep people in jail per year too, individually, right? And people are willing to spend that, but they go crazy about the amount of money that's being spent for local kids and poor and working class communities. And there are things that we need in this city that other people pay for privately on their own, like summer school or social workers or attendance counselors or an additional child study team person, because the special needs or autism or all the things that we have that people in other off districts pay on their own, or so in other districts you have to pay for summer schools. Like some of you guys don't know that, right? So if you lived in another district, if you had to go to summer school, your mother and father got to pay for that. In Newark you don't, right? And there's some things that we supplement, and because we supplement those things, the cost per pupil grows. It grows because the country, we are paying in the school system for the inequalities that exist in the country before you went to school, right? You're paying for the gap in wealth, the gap in poverty, the access to things that other communities take for granted that kids in Newark don't have access to because they don't live in communities or have the kind of wealth in their family to get those things. So we pay. Like we pay for extra SAT scores. We pay for vouchers so you to take the SAT. We pay all these other kind of things that the district pays for, and we have to pay for that. Like some attendance counselors, which is the number one problem that the city, the district has, is attendance, right? We have a huge problem in folks coming to school, and then the district fires all the attendance counselors, right? Which, it's kind of oxymoron, but at the end of the day, we have to keep those things into consideration. But I would, in terms of the district, there's a lot of money spent, in central office and the downtown side, and that money has been since diminished a lot. But I think there should be more money as it relates to, you know, access to schools. More money should go directly to schools themselves and to programs that affect kids directly. Right? And there should be a kind of deliberate and thoughtful kind of approach to making sure that monies that come into the district are paired with schools, particularly around the things that they need to make those schools better. You know, whether it's attendance counselors or guidance counselors or drug counselors or, you know, all the other pieces that we need, or after school programs or extended day or opportunities for you to have access to greater curriculum. I think that money should be really, really focused on that. And we spend a lot of money trying to teach people to do their job. Right, so, and a lot of administrators on top of the administrators. Like, you got an administrator that's in charge of another administrator. So, you got to really figure that out.
I appreciate that answer.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about accents, and now that like the community has is allowed to like elect their school board, do you think that do you think it's going to be hard to get parents to be more invested in like kind of that election process now that, because historically they didn't have to, or have you found that there's been the same absence in students that they're in?
Oh, I hope so. Parents voted in the school board election. The school board just didn't have any power. So hopefully now that the school board has some authority, that parents feel more inclined to come out and be a part of what's going on. And not the same 15 people that come down there all the time, that, you know, more parents feel like they have a kind of say-so in it. And hopefully, you know, we have more input and more involvement in the elections and at the school level, because that's more important, you know, very important.
Yeah, part of the way that I think this class we've talked a little bit about kind of this wave of people getting involved in local politics, and I think that maybe the way that the students and us were discussing it was this, you know, a new wave of people involved in local politics, and it's manifesting itself in a variety of ways across the country. And here in Newark, it's on this issue, which we think is really great. A question that came up, so we had watched, I mentioned that Frontline piece, and then we had kind of seen actually a clip with a judge giving a decision regarding the Newark Citizen Complaint Review Board. So we know that police reform is a big issue across the country, and we know that you've taken a really great stance about it and really tried to do a lot of things. And I know this last ruling was a little bit challenging, and so kind of what are your plans for police reform in Newark, right? You know, in your second term and kind of going forward.
Well, we just want to, you know, continue to push what we've been doing, like create a better relationship between the police and the community. We've actually have good numbers. I mean, we're down citizen complaints almost 40% in the city. We have less complaints, less arrests, but more reduction in areas of crime in the city. So we want to continue to go down that means that we are targeting, and we're not just throwing a big net out harassing everybody who we think, you know, could be involved in something. But we want to, we're appealing the Civilian Complaint Review Board. The court did not say we couldn't have it, so we do have it, and we're going to go forward with it in full speed. What they did say is that we could not have an investigation power and subpoena power, which makes our board different from any other board around the country. And so we're going to continue to push that because we think it's necessary for us to have it. But in the meanwhile, we're going to continue our Civilian Complaint Review Board the way it is.
You mentioned earlier that you don't typically have plenties. How does that persistency impact like that situation and like just any of your policies and your leadership style?
Yeah, sometimes it's not a good thing. So I don't, you know, prescribe that for everyone. You know, people always say you need a fallback plan, and I know your parents always tell you that. What's your fallback plan? I just think that a lot of times people assume that their plan is not going to work, so they spend time working on another plan, when I feel like that time you spend working on plan B should be invested in the plan that you want to happen for yourself anyway. You know, you just have to be persistent and consistent consistent about what it is that you want to do. Have a real thoughtful plan and work it. Just work your plan as much as you possibly can. And I have in my life You know, even if Plan A didn't work out, I've done so much to make that happen that whatever happened as a result of that, like, has always been beneficial to me, right? It's like we going full steam ahead for Amazon, right? Like we're just gonna go like bonkers for it, and we have been. And I feel like we won already, and even if it doesn't happen, like we're not out here looking for other companies because we don't think we're gonna get Amazon. Like people say, oh, Newark is not gonna get Amazon. Like we're on the list with New York, Chicago, LA, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Newark, you know? Right, so my thing is we're gonna keep pushing, and if we don't get it, we've already won. We like the Philadelphia 76ers in the championship, you know what I mean? Then nobody expect us to be there, so we feeling good third quarter, you know what I'm saying? So that's how I feel about it, and the benefits from focusing on Plan A far outweighs you falling back on something else.
That's great. That's great.
Yes, yeah.
It's tough. I'm a Celtics fan. You know, that's tough. But
They're not winning either.
yeah, no, absolutely not. No, see them rise. One other thing that we talked about, we learned about with we talked about housing, and we talked about historical housing discrimination in Newark over its long history, but also more recent issues and issues that have been affecting, you know, developing, you know, big cities around the country. And I know that you've spoken a lot about these issues, and you an issue in the campaign was the inclusionary zoning ordinance, and so you might talk a little about that. And again, keep in mind that they're high school sophomores, so we don't need to go into all the exact details, but kind of what your plans are to make sure that Newark develops for all Newarkers.
Right. Housing is a problem all over America. You'd be surprised of the places that have issues around housing. Like, housing is an issue in Newark, but it's also a issue in like you know, resort towns who make their money off of people coming to the community, but the people who work there have nowhere to live, right? And because housing is expensive, most of our parents and most of the people that live in Newark, 70% are renters. They spend at least 30 to 50% of their income on housing, which means they spend a lot of money. The money that they make, most of the money they make goes towards the rent, right? And if they made less money, they'd be homeless, right? Or they don't have money for other things in your life. And so we have to, as Newark, we become a victim of our success. So as all of this development and all of this housing comes to Newark, we have to create opportunities for people who've been here so they could stay in the city, they could afford the housing. And so it's a thin line. We got to walk it a fine line. We have to walk it because you don't want to be opposed to development, because I see a lot of people who scream and holler when they see new things come. Like, so if you go to Broad Street in Newark, like, our brain is, I don't know, understand, some of us go to part of it, we won't go down the other part of the street because we don't think that that's for us. And I've had this conversation with people, which is really absurd. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who talk about all of the development that they see happening, the new stores and new buildings going up, and they think that means that the city is changing bad for them. But these people actually go to those stores in other cities, right? You understand what I'm saying? So they'll go hang out in Manhattan and South Orange and Elizabeth, have a great time, then come back to Newark, right? Which is a problem. But then they complain that Newark doesn't have all of the things that those towns have because they're taking all of the money out of our city and putting it somewhere else. You have to, in order to build your town, you have to spend money in your community. It's just like the money, and then the money stays in the community and it circulates and it helps you do everything from hire police to fix roads, to get you jobs, put training, put money in schools. All of those things is what separates your community from other people's communities. And so when things come to Newark, you have to be happy that those things come because it brings more revenue, but you also have to deal with the fact that it may increase the cost of living in that city. So you have to create laws that make it necessary or possible for people to stay in the city where they were born and raised. And that's what we're doing with inclusionary zoning, trying to make sure that there's housing available and all the new stuff that you're going up, that there's affordable housing in it.
I was wondering how you divide your time between kind of like your role as Newark mayor and your focus on Newark citizens and those policies that affect Newark citizens versus kind of broad national policies, President Trump, and those policies that may also impact Newark residents. Do you feel like you're tied to that in some way, or are you very kind of local based in terms of what your specific reach on?
Well, most of the issues that we have in Newark are national issues. So everything that we're trying to improve in the city is national problems that we tackle, whether it's unemployment or poverty or education or issue around immigrants and undocumented folks. This is dreamers, all that stuff. The local issues, but they're also national issues. But and I always say this around the country with mayors, we joke with each other. Like if you're a mayor of a city like Newark, you have to do what other mayors do. Like you have to worry about the garbage collection, the snow, potholes, but you also have to worry about people dying, right? And access to food and poison in the air and the water, things that other people don't have to deal with. We have real issues that we have to deal with every single day. So, I always tell people my job is to create an environment where we're producing people that are brilliant enough to and courageous enough to change the system they live in so it benefits them. And then secondly, to keep them alive long enough so they can do it. And this is what I deal with every day as I come into City Hall. Those are the issues that I deal with. Besides the garbage being picked up in the snow and all the other kind of stuff, I have real serious things to grapple with.
So at this point, Mayor Baraka, so these were questions from our students, but there are some that we didn't get to ask. We can't ask all of them. And I know some of the students in the audience wanted to be able to ask some questions. So what we'll do is we'll call on a few. I see Rashid in the back. Rashid, you want to ask your question? You want to stand up and tell them where you go to school and then ask your question.
Hi, I'm Rashid. I currently I'm a rising sophomore at Franklin Marshall College, and I really appreciate you for being here. I'm a big fan of Howard. We got a lot of educated people in there. I was this past semester I wrote an article about how wonderful the job you're doing in Newark. But my critique came in. The first one is, how are you making sure that Newark is retaining its top talent? Because I know a lot of kids in the city, who are going to Ivies, who are going to top level art. How are you ensuring that those kids actually come back and pay their dues to Newark? It's kind of my first question, and my second and last question is, when you're making really big decisions, kind of like bringing in Amazon, bringing in big companies, which you think are beneficial for the city, are you getting inputs from the people who live in the city, or are you just making a decision based on what you think is right and wrong for our environment?
Well, the first one, we have something called Hire, Buy, Live, where we are getting these corporations in the city to hire local residents, and not just entry-level jobs and jobs that we think that they're forecasting, that we're trying to get them to do that and invest in small local businesses here and encourage their employees to live in the city at the same time. We are just building it out. I mean, it's probably about a year old, 1 year old, and we are less than a year old, and I think we've made a lot of headway in terms of cultural changes in the way companies think about the city. Our infrastructure, building our infrastructure to make sure we create pipelines, we're doing that. And I think inclusionary zoning helps because it makes the kind of housing here affordable for folks who are just getting out of college and young people. And we have a bunch of venture capital funds in the city of startups to get people locally involved. And I think what happens is that a lot of these young people have in their mind that there's nothing happening around here, so they leave, and that's a cultural thing that we have to change because they're busy trying to leave the city as opposed to and make excuses for themselves about why they should leave the city, as opposed to figuring out how to come back and help advance what's happening in the city. In my mind, I always knew I would be in Newark doing this before we had venture capital, before we had Hire, Buy, Live, before we had all those things. I already knew I was coming here, so I didn't need nobody to give me anything to help retain me here. I knew that my job was to be here in this community to give other people the opportunities. For example, when I was going to college, my best friend was on a bus going to jail, right? So at the end of the day, my job was to make sure that more kids were on the bus to college and less were on the bus to jail. And I made it my business to get back to this community and do those things without an incentive. Now we have a bunch of incentives, so there's a lot of young people, they should be here. And yeah, we get a lot of, you know, we have input from a lot of folks, you know, but as my mother would say, I live here, right? And there are a lot of people, you know, so my decisions that I make are based on my experience in life in this town, right? So I'm not a transplant, I didn't come from Mars, like I actually was born and raised in this town, in this community every single day. My mother lives here, my family live here, I eat here, I hang out here, my best friends live here, and some of my worst enemies live here too. So at the end of the day, I'm engaged in this community, so the decisions I make are based on my experiences and conversations with, you know, both friends and allies and enemies that I come across in this town. So I'm not like in a vacuum, you know.
Ryan, you want to ask a question?
Hello, my name is Ryan. I'm a rising sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for coming. Really interested in your background and what you've done so far for the city. You mentioned collaborations earlier on in the talk, and I think collaborations are huge because you're able to merge and utilize the best practices from a variety of sectors, right, and congregate together towards a better and greater change. I'm particularly interested in the private sector and its intersection with the public sector, and I wanted to see how you're able to manage and have conversations about some of the interests that both parties have and making sure you're arriving at a common ground and balancing what each party wants for its own agenda. And just a quick follow-up to that, what intersection or what collaboration have you seen have the greatest effect, of course positive, on the city, whether it's like in real estate, whether it's in education?
Yeah.
Thank
well, one, honesty is important. And I don't think that we come to a common ground. We come to something that we can live with, right? And that's what we get to. Like, and you have to know that when you're going in, that you're not going to get everything. The best kind of compromise is when everybody leaves a little unhappy, right? That means everybody gave something in order to get to the place that we are. And each party is going to push back to get what they want. As long as people understand that you are fair and you have the best interests of the entire city at hand, and there's no kind of, like, people know what to expect when they come into meetings with me. There's no, like, hidden agenda, or you have to do something special, or there's a secret meeting we got to have after the meeting we have. They basically know what it is, right? You got to hire Newark residents, you have to make sure, you know, that there's opportunities for Newark folks here. All of those things, and they understand that, and they know that there has to be a way for us to get there, and if they can get us to that point, so there's tremendous pushback from developers, from private sector around a few things, and pushback from community folks too. You just have to have the strength to be able to deal with both sides, right? You go to the community, they're not completely happy because what you did here. Developers are not completely happy because you leaned and allowed community folks in, but you have to have strength in your resolve to get this thing done. You have to be very, very honest about what you want and stick to that. And I think that respect people's opinions and be willing to talk to people you don't like. I mean, that's important. I don't think everybody can do that, right? And it's hard. You know, I tell people I grew up in Newark. You know, it's hard to talk to people who talk about you all the time. You know, but at the end of the day, you have to be able to have conversations with people who are diametrically opposed to what it is that you want to do. Because your job is to build bridges to make things happen. You're not in a protest, so it's different. It's different for me, and I came from an activist community, so I had to change that. Like, my job is to come out of the meeting with something. Something has to happen. I can't go in there with my lip poked out in the sign, right? I need people outside with their lip poked out in the sign, but I need to be in a meeting to making sure I get something done.
Kennedy?
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry. The education piece is the best. The university community has been the best kind of collaborator with us throughout our tenure here. The best thing we've ever done. Chancellor Cannon, Rutgers University.
My name is Kennedy Lowe, and I attend Science Park High School in 10th grade. So there's been a large conversation about, you know, teachers in Newark and their representation. I guess you know the population is mostly minorities. So as a person who was once in the school community, do you feel like representation for minorities matter to students?
Yes, I think it matters. I also think, because I've been in public schools for 22 years and I was also a student, so but I also believe that people's content, like what they feel, what they believe, their ideas are important too. Like there are people who culturally identify with me and nationally through their nationality and race identify with me, but ideologically their ideas are different from mine, right? And so we would be opposed to one another, right? So, but it's also important, and so you have to keep that in mind. Doesn't just because you have somebody that looks like you in those positions don't necessarily mean that they're going to do for you the things that you need done. And you have to be clear on that. So that's not the end of it. So because there's two things: there's self-determination and democracy. So you also have to have the right to have people look like you in these places, who are empathetic to your plight, who understand the kind of cultural things that you're going through, and you should have representation in a democratic way, of those folks in those positions. It's key, and it's very, very important for the developmental growth of young people to be able to see people who they can relate to, affiliate with, and identify with in positions of authority, in leadership, and teachers. We just need to be able to see that. It's very important, particularly if you're growing up in a community where a lot of stuff is missing. It's not a lot of structural kind of strength there. You need to be able to see that in other places. Go ahead. I want to say something else about that, but go ahead.
My name is Steve Sanchez. I attended North Star Academy, Lincoln Park High School. As a son of two immigrants coming from the Dominican Republic, if you look around Newark, Ironbound, North Newark, just Newark in general, we see a rise of immigrants coming from Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, in certain areas. And so, being a son of immigrants and a lot of first support gen immigrants who come to America, a lot of times we feel a lot of animosity when it comes to Native people from Newark. Like we feel like a lot of times they view us as people that's taking spots in schools or taking jobs in certain areas. And so, as a mayor of Newark, how do you view bridging the gap between the immigrants that are coming in now and the people who are native born people from Newark?
Well, Newark has a bunch of different nationalities in this town, in this community, and we make sure that we cater to, represent, and have as much interaction and engagement as we possibly can. And I just think that because we're in this environment, we're in nationally, that is more pronounced. And I think people in Newark, are used to struggle and all kind of other things. And they have, we are more humane to one another, in my mind, and what I've been able to see in this city, than people would give the city credit for. I think that a lot of people are more tolerant than most places, though we need more education around people's cultures and identities. Like when I first went to Central, it was a lot of separation, but it was so easy to get the kids together once we created spaces for that. I think it's the same thing with the city, to be able to create spaces for people to interact, to engage with one another. And we still refer to ourselves as minority, and we're not the minority here. There's, as a matter of fact, in the year 2020, which is around the corner, the majority of Americans under the age of 18 are going to identify as people of color. So that says a lot for the direction the country is going in, despite what the president says. Science and, if you believe in God, God has a different idea, right? So at the end of the day, it is important for us to recognize all these different nationalities and people and cultures in the city, and celebrate them. And I think that's the only way. We have to identify, we have to celebrate, we can't hide, we have to give people access to be able to talk about the differences that people have. We think it's a weakness, but it's a strength. Right? It's not a weakness at all.
Nakai?
Hi, my name is Mikhail Gibbs. I'm a rising sophomore at the College of Holy Cross, and of course I'm a Mama Bendavi. My question is, what can we do as students to be better citizens of Newark, and to be more engaged and active? Because of course, you know, like we only think like we can only vote, we can only like go to like meetings as like adults, but like what can we do as students to like be more active and engaged in our city?
Yeah, I think that so first Newark has its, like, so if you're in Newark, we have a youth ambassadors. We have an office in Newark, youth office. We have Leadership Academy meetings every third Saturday at King's Restaurant. You get free food and you get to talk to other smart kids. We have a summer leadership camp for young people in the city. We have opportunities for young people to be involved in almost everything, every aspect of political life of this city. But I think that you should engage yourself in an organization of some sort. If there's no organization that you want to be a part of, you should create your own organization. I think you should be engaged in what happens in your neighborhood, in your community, around various things that you think is important, whether it's cleanliness, the environment, police issues, issues around education. You need to engage the various organizations that exist, be a part of those things. They need creative, imaginative, exciting young people to be involved in that stuff. And sometimes the things are not moving as fast as they should be because you're not there. When you get there, I'm sure it's going to move a lot faster than it would be. But moving, and you should do that in whatever neighborhood that you live in whatever city you come from. You should be engaged and not play a spectator role. You should be have an active role.
Crystal, I know you had a question.
My name is Crystal. I go to Bard High School Early College. And while I understand that you are not directly in charge of our education system, as someone who was formerly a teacher and a principal and a student, of course, I would still like to hear your perspective on the issue I'm about to mention. And while I was searching up public high schools, just out of curiosity, I noticed a trend that's become alarming to me. And that is being that the average test scores are noticeably lower in the math and science field than the English field. And I would like to hear your perspective on how can we improve, not just as students, but as young citizens, in what we're not good at, or what we're not too good at, but at the same time maintain what we're already good at?
Well, I just had a conversation with the president of NJIT about the very exact thing, because Rutgers has increased its enrollment of Newark students by 60% in the last 3 years, right? Based on Newark City Learning Collaborative, they're doing a very, very deliberate and proactive kind of program to recruit young people from our city and even giving them scholarships, right? So I had a relationship with NJIT when I was the principal there. I just was at NJIT yesterday at the graduation, and 2 of my students were graduating that day. That was students when I was at Central High School, because we had a program specifically designed to, make kids take calculus. So at 1 o'clock they left the school, they went to NJIT, they took calculus there. If they passed the calculus class, at the end they got into the school and they got free tuition. They just didn't get the room and board, but they lived in Newark, so they could live at their mom's house and their mom's house, right? But the tuition was there. So all those kids that graduated went to school for free. All they had to do was pass that calculus class. Our discussion was about how do we prepare or create a pipeline for young people who are embracing math and science at an earlier age, and how do we get the teachers, that are prepared to be able to do that. And sometimes that's one of the hardest positions to fill, kind of math and science positions, and the more specialized you get, the more difficult it becomes to fill, right? Whether you're talking about physics or calculus, and a lot of our schools don't offer those courses. And so the greatest segregation in these schools is the segregation of curriculum, right? So there's an entirely different curriculum that takes place in other schools in other municipalities, as opposed to what's happening in Newark. But we don't have the kind of diversity of curriculum that other people have. We don't have the AP courses. We don't have the pipeline to those AP courses. And we're not training kids at lower grades because we think that they can't do the work. So they may be behind, and we think that in order to catch up, we slow down, right? Which is ridiculous. So they take like remedial math classes 15 different times, and they never get a chance to have access to high-level math classes or access to diversity in science classes, which means that they're already behind when they get to high school, and they become less interested in those classes. Why? Because they can't pass them. And because they can't pass them, they stay away from those classes, which means in the long run, we're going to get less people in the science field, less people in the math field, less people at NJIT. His complaint was, Mr. Mayor, you want me to do what Rutgers does, but we can't do what Rutgers does because we need science and engineering and we need help. So we're trying to create a program where we get math teachers trained, science teachers trained by NJIT to put them not just in the high schools, but in elementary schools in 7th and 8th grade. Right? I think all 8th graders should take algebra, all 7th graders should take algebra. In Newark, that's not the case. They don't take algebra. They wait till they get to the 9th grade, take algebra. Some of them don't take geometry to the end of the 10th grade year. Sometimes in the 11th grade, they're taking geometry. And the state test is full of geometry. So you're testing kids on stuff that they've never even seen before. And so you know they're going to fail it because they ain't even seen it. So it's just logical to me, you know, but we have to give those courses lower. And what you're saying is absolutely correct. And guess who's going to fix that? You and students. You're going to fix that. You know why? Because the adults are not going to fix it. Kids have to clamor for that and say, this is what we want, in order for the adults to begin to understand that they have to do this in a very systemic. So we've mastered the fact that we have to do reading and, you know, give people books and after school libraries and all that stuff. So we're making improvements, obviously. We haven't done the same thing for math and science.
Yeah.
Yet.
Anthony, you got a question?
My name is Anthony Vaughn. I go to Abundant Life Academy Private School in Nutley. So since you've been reelected as mayor for a second term, I wanted to know how you look to lower the crime rate and especially the gun violence rate in the city.
Well, the good thing about that is that it's happening already, right? So we like 30% less homicides than we had in 2014. So we're not having a victory party, but we are going in the right direction. We're going to continue to do that, right? And we will continue to hire more police officers. We have a Newark Community Street Team, Street Academy, all kinds of different things that are designed to target the 4,000 to 6,000 young people that are in our city that are not in any school and that do not have a job, right? That's about the number of kids that you have. That we target that number and we make small dents, and we're going to continue to do that, marching that, downward. I would say 90% of the victim, 90% of the perpetrators of violent crime in Newark look like you and me. You know, they're African American men between the ages of 18 and 30, right? And 100% of the victims, 100% of the victims look like you and me, right? Unless it's domestic violence or something like that, right? So, and over 90% of them have had contact with the law, which means that now people are not going around shooting people indiscriminately. You understand what I'm saying? This is, and most of it is about personal disputes. So it's not even gang violence. It's personal disputes. Gang violence is sexy, something on TV. Oh, gang this, gang that. It's personal disputes, problems that people have with one another that turn violent. And so that's why Newark Community Street Team is important. We create a group that deals with trauma, that goes to the hospital when people are shot to try to prevent retaliation, to go in communities where they know that there's conflict and try to reduce the level of conflict in those neighborhoods before police can get to it, before it turns into a situation where police have to be there. And those kind of strategies we're going to spend a lot more money and energy on because they're working. It's very, very expensive to deal with homicides and violence in the city. And it puts the whole city under like this kind of stress. Because people are afraid, but 80% of the streets in the city experience no violent crime at all, right? So what does that mean? That means that you feel like it's the whole city because it's on the news every day, right? And it's on so everybody in the city and the state think violence, violence, violence. The good thing is not happening in most part of the city. The bad thing is that if you live in the area, of that 20% area, you experience 100% of the issues, right? So if you lived in those areas, you feel like you're like in hell. because it's all going down in my neighborhood, right? And so we learning how to target crime as opposed to like having police officers everywhere you go.
You have time for a few more questions, Mr. Mayor. I know that some students have. I know, you had your hand up.
Hi, my name is Inrochin. I go to Technology High School. So my question is on unemployment rate. And from my research, I understand that Newark's unemployment rate is 113% higher than the national average, and that seems alarming to me. And I understand it as like Newark geographics is like right next to New York, so I guess the corporates, they're hiring people from New York. So what is your goal in reducing this number? And if you even have a goal on how big of a change are you going to see?
Well, the unemployment rate when I took office was 12%, right? So it's about 70-something% now. And we're going to continue to push in that direction. That's why hire by live is important. A lot of, warehousing and, things like that are coming to the city. We are pushing those things and forcing people to hire Newark residents, which is affecting the unemployment rate. But we have to train our residents around some of these jobs and make sure that you kids, when you graduate, you have the skills to be able to get into these positions that we are forcing these corporations to open up to Newark residents, right? We have to continue to push in that direction to reduce unemployment rate, There's a whole large discussion that we can have about the economy that we live in America and, what needs to happen ultimately, but I don't think we have the time to do that today. Love to have a larger, should come to our leadership academy. We could talk a little bit more about, the underdevelopment of inner cities in America, purposefully.
Maybe just one more here. Donna, I know you had a question you wanted to ask? Mm-hmm. The last one here, Donna, I think.
Yeah. So I'm Donna Gordon. I go to St. Benedict's Prep. My question was, since I used to live in Brooklyn, and the reason why I actually moved here is because my apartment, the fee was getting higher. It was raising higher, and plus there was more jobs coming in, and I don't see anybody like me anymore there. So we were forced to move out, and since your plan was to bring in these major companies and new jobs for us, I just want to know if it would also be like, would we still have a place to stay here,
right,
and still have the opportunity to work at these high-level jobs and
right,
fancy names like Amazon and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm gonna force y'all to take notes, man. But we have this thing called Hire by Live, where we're making the corporations hire Newark residents, and inclusionary zoning is designed so all these buildings you see going up, they have to have 20% of the units in those buildings have to be affordable, right? Or they can't build them. Right now they can't get a tax abatement, which is a reduction on some of their taxes, and they can't get a variance or a change in I'm trying to say it in the zoning ordinance. Like sometimes you have to do things to your building that the law doesn't allow. In order for you to do it, you have to go before a board, and they allow you to do that. But if you want that done, you have to have a certain percentage of affordable housing in your building. Next year, it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. Every building that goes up in the city has to have 20% affordability. That was one of the things that we kind of worked out with developers, that we phased it in so they're not hit with all of it, because it's going to cost them money to put affordable units in their building. It costs them more money to build to be able to do that. And so you taking from their profits to provide affordability for residents. So we phased it in. So ultimately they're going to have to provide affordable housing for the people in this town.
I think Toby actually had one last one to just wrap us up. Thank you.
So, I mean, from this conversation and from what I've known about you before, your world revolves around public service. You have and are committed to serving members of the community, serving students, serving parents and everyone in this community. And I know you probably get this question a lot, but have you considered, albeit you are going into this new term, expanding your commitment to service and commitment to community work in terms of local possible governor run or Senate run?
Not me. I think other people have those aspirations for me, but I'm just overwhelmed by what I'm doing now and every day. So I'm like 100% focused on what I need to do in the city. I've never been a person to look to something else before I finish what I started. Like, I feel like if I do a good job here, people are going to, you know, create a pathway for me to go somewhere else. So I would give all my energy and time to what's happening here in the city of Newark. There's a lot to do. Yeah, in a short period of time.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor
Thank
Baraka,
you for
for your
having
time.
me.
A round of
Appreciate
applause.
it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you speaking with our students.
No problem.
And I know they all learned a lot, and they all should feel free to still grab a snack or a water on the way out. If you want a cookie, make sure you grab one on your way.
I was looking at them.
Yeah, please. Make sure you grab one of our only left is oatmeal raisin. Because to avoid those like the plague.
Thank you. Appreciate it, man. Thank you. No problem. Thanks a lot.
I'll make sure to take notes on them.